Think about the opening moments of some of your favorite games. For some of you, it's the introduction to BioShock's beautiful Rapture. For others, it could be blowing up the Mako reactor in Final Fantasy VII.
Hey, you. You're finally awake.
There are too many iconic intros to count. Just this year, we've gotten a few that have burned themselves into my brain in some way. But few stick with me, and even fewer impress me on a revisit, quite like Pathologic 2's. Pathologic is not a game I would recommend to almost anyone. It is a survival game at its core, though. You play as Artemi Barach, a doctor called back by his father Isidore to a hometown he abandoned a long time ago. A plague spreads through this town, buried deep in the Russian steppe, and it's your job to keep people alive, find a cure, and unravel the secrets of what is one of the most otherworldly and weird locations a game has ever taken me to, when you consider the fact that it looks so mundane on the surface. Inventory management is the name of the game. Choosing who to save and knowing how to do it, while using as little of the very limited resources you have, while fighting for your own survival, is genuinely brutal here. Failure and death are all but guaranteed. If I had to describe Pathologic in one word, it would be desperation. I dropped it and came back several times before it really hooked me, just because of how difficult it really is. The way you're introduced to the world of Pathologic reflects these feelings. You start at the end of the game, in a timeline where you failed to create a cure. The military has seized the entire town and intends to eradicate the plague at any cost. Firing squads line the streets, and you can hear people screaming and begging for their lives in the distance. On its own, I love this section. It's so horrific and dreadful and interesting. And the music, man, oh my god, it's so good. But in the context of the entire intro and the rest of the game, I think it is greatly elevated. I'll dig into it more later on. You make your way to the cathedral and fail to change the minds of the people running the operation. And then this guy shows up. Yeah, so this game is also a play. It's a can of worms I'm not really gonna open right now. Just know that it does tie into the greater story and gameplay in a cool way. I just don't think there's much to address this early on. But this guy, he gives you the chance to try again, to start all the way over in hopes of making a cure in time. What are you talking about? You were in the coffin, not me. This game is weird, man. Everything that follows until you finally make it to the town is full of weird imagery and symbolism that a new player might not fully grasp and honestly might find pretentious. But running through this again after beating it showed me how Ice Pick Lodge perfectly executed all of this foreshadowing and world building under the guise of a pretty short tutorial. You appear in this house and find this woman in pain, and she asks you to go fetch her some water. This is the first instance of you helping somebody in the game, and it also introduces you to the looting and inventory mechanics. Water is a vital resource in Pathologic, and these barrels scattered around town are one of the ways you can get some. This section also introduces you to some important characters in the story before they transform into these creepy, puppet-looking people called tragedians. Going heavy into the theater stuff again, but I am still staying on topic. The Coffin Man wakes you up from what was apparently a bad dream, only for you to be sucked into another piece of the tutorial, which specifically surprised me on this revisit. It may seem like a simple combat tutorial, but it really is so much more. Again, I feel like the only people who can really appreciate these things are people who know where the game takes you with these small bits of foreshadowing. In this section, you're introduced to the kin, and alongside it, what is so far the most in-depth speech options you've been exposed to. The kin, simply put, are a group of people in Pathologic who believe in the collective. They believe that the Earth itself is one being, and to be closer to it, they believe in giving up their sense of self to contribute to the whole. You learn here that Artemy has some connection to the kin right before the combat tutorial starts. Pathologic 2's combat is terrible, hilariously so. But it is intentional. As you get further in, it teaches you that combat becomes something of a last resort. At the end of this section, you're introduced to Pathologic's trading mechanic in a very interesting way. For me, trading hearts with the kin does two things narratively. Firstly, it enforces the kin's culture and beliefs in this narrative through gameplay, which is very cool. A river of good washes away a drop of rot. There is no me and you. There is a people, Katange. Mix your flesh with ours. It also shows us the length of time Artemy has been gone and how disconnected he is from this earth and from his people, with a rotten and wormy heart? The final stretch of what is considered the intro takes you through Isidore Brach's house as he narrates the letter you received from him a while ago. It's the last hook before you finally reach the town proper, and honestly, I don't have too much to say about this part. It doesn't do too much for me. Reaching the town and finally seeing your father is where I consider the tutorial to end. The moment you get off the train, these three dudes jump you and you barely make it out alive. These guys reassure you that you're on the brink of death. The first thing a normal player would do is go see Isidore, all the way on the other side of the map. It takes a minute to get over there, and these moments are why I think the initial section of the intro works so well. Pathologic is not the first piece of media to work this trope. Showing off a small piece of the middle or even the end of the story near the climax with little to no context before cutting back to the beginning is in so many movies and games, books, whatever. It's a very common and effective method of storytelling, and one that works here for a couple reasons. Compared to the walk across town you made in the beginning, where every square inch was filled with death, disease, and violence, this trek through the town is especially mundane. The weird things you do see feel out of place, like the town itself is trying to hide its secrets while little things slip through the cracks. Like it's also an actor in this unusual play. The other reason I think this specific part of Pathologic 2 is so effective in the context of the very beginning is simply because most people will not see this town in that terrible shape again. The difficulty of this game is no joke, and death alongside every bad decision you make just makes the game more and more difficult. If I were to take a guess, most people will make it a few days in before the difficulty spike and the harsh realities of the world filters most of the players out. Once you make it to the other side of town, people are gathered right outside your father's house, and the front door is locked. He was murdered right before you arrived. On top of all that, you're a suspect of this, the murders of the three men at the station, and some guy named Simon Kane. In this culture, only certain people are allowed to cut the bodies of others. Isidore was one of those men. Artemy is not. Everybody knows everything in this small town, and you got off on the wrong foot. The brilliance of Pathologic 2's intro up until this point is a mix of many things. The introduction of mechanics through the narrative in an interesting way, the developer's excellent use of restraint and foreshadowing with striking imagery, the way the odds stack against you so quickly, and the assurance from the game that you will never understand what it all means, purely because failure likely drove you away, is all beautifully put together. If anything I've said about Pathologic 2 interests you at all, I'd recommend you at least try it. If you love this medium as much as I do, you'll find something at the very least interesting about how different it is from everything else. And if you happen to become one of the very few that finishes the game, it will probably become one of your all-time favorites.